Table.
I think our most pertinent question probably is how do we make sure the new society agenda doesn't leave too many people out?
15-second note.
Until Liverpool pulled out totally of being big society the other day, I was proudly walking around saying, wow, look at Dorset, we're a really good example of how big society is actually working. But I agree with what's been said here. Big society isn't something that you can just implant into communities and say, well, that'll run your libraries, run your coffee mornings, take over your citizens' advice bureaus, etc. It just won't work like that. It takes a long time to get even into a position where I could vaguely comfortably say that we were a good model of big society. It wouldn't certainly have happened within the first 6 months of us being in existence.
I have a kind of public view of the big society and a private view. And I'll tell you both. The big society for me has been quite liberating in some ways. So I found it's forced me to think about the relationship between state and citizen and what the role of both are.
No one's done anything. In Iceland, they said in similar situations, no, we'll let the banks go bust. We have a power to determine what actually happens at those big levels. And the more we sit back and accept the framing set by governments, by politicians, the more than they get their agenda.
Thank you, Peter. Where are you? Yeah.
We've got sort of separate thoughts, and you'd like to comment on that really. We're kind of concerned about inherent contradictions between that kind of, like a lot of us have sort of short-term funding and how do we achieve long-term goals on that. We're very impressed with the idea of looking at the values and resetting things, like how do we get there from our very local, where we work in very local communities and what local communities want. From the very local to the vision for the whole community. We just wanted to comment on how do we get there really.
Okay, before anyone answers, one of my colleagues just prompted me, anyone who knows me knows I'm probably very influenced by breakfast cereal competitions of the 70s. So I'd love to say to people, can you sum your answer up in not more than 12 words? If not, as near to it as you can. Probably take longer trying to...
I'm going to set the framing for my 12-word answer, but at the last Transition Network conference, there was a talk given by an economist, a woman called Nicole Fost, and she painted a picture of what actually happens when enormous bubbles burst. And of course, we had a credit bubble, and that's going wrong, the house price bubble, and people went out of that talk in a state of real shock. And oh God, what do I do? What do I do about the fact I've got a mortgage, etc., etc. I've got any debt at all. And I was being interviewed after that, and I was thinking, how do we respond to that? What can we actually do in our own lives? And the answer I came up with, which was less than 12 words.
That was clever, wasn't it?
I did O-level logic. I asked myself every day, what have I done to increase how much I trust other people and how much they trust me?
3 words. Demonstrate by doing, I think. So model that behaviour, and if I can add 4 or 5 more words. I can't think what the second word is, but belligerent do-gooding, I think. Just kind of get out there and model the values and just model democracy. For me, at the heart of this is democracy. Belligerent democracy, but not muscular liberalism.
This is working really well.
Right. It all takes time. Use your mates. Remain keen and enthusiastic, and keep the faith.
Hey. Great.
I like the style of general sort of thought, so I'll probably get all 3 questions in one way or another.
Yeah.
For example, a very straightforward one is, to Peter, is how is the Bristol pound going to work where other systems like LETS have failed? And how do we operate when the infrastructure of the third sector has gone? which leads to how do we sustain a strategic view to maximise resources and skills when localism seems to be what it's all about.
So let's pick up the second question. How do we keep that strategic view? One of the things that's missing from the big society debate, as it were, is what the role of our elected representatives are, specifically councillors. Councillors, we need, and the role of councillors needs to change. We were talking a little bit about this on our table. The role of councillors is going to be much less within the City Hall, within the Town Hall, and much more around as a network knows, as a community leader, and pulling groups together, developing that strategic vision. So one of the things I guess my pleas would be go away from here, build councillors into your work.
I'd reinforce that as well. I mean, the reason that we're successful is that it's taken 5 years to get to a point at which I would say we are very popular. And we're popular because we've got that buy-in strategically, and we've got that sign-up strategically. And that's been reasonable hard work, but not as hard as you'd have thought it would be. So I'd say stick at it. But the strategic bit is where you need to be, and part of that strategic influence is about parish councillors, town councillors, engaging district councillors, and getting everyone else in as well as that.
Peter?
Well, I'll look backwards at the strategic view and the localism agenda. And in the transition process, certainly, we always start with generalised awareness raising, which is about how do we big issues have their impact on us in our own neighbourhood, in our own locality. And I think we have to try and do exactly the same thing in terms of the bigger strategic issues in localism. Infrastructure, the third sector being gone, quite literally in some instances, and going to happen and accelerate much more over the next couple of years, probably. Sustrans shouldn't exist. Sustrans exists because the Department for Transport isn't doing its job. It's a department for mobility rather than a department about increasing people's ability to access what they need.
It's very difficult to put a financial value on, and they're very difficult to measure in that way. So what we were concerned about was how can we make a case to government and funding organisations to prove that this is a difficult concept and that it's a way that we need to consider it.
Thank you.
Our Director of Public Health in Dorset has warned me about not stressing up so much how important the cost-benefit analysis of our programme is in comparison to those outcomes. So you're talking about a person as far up the food chain as you can get in public health for Dorset, very influential in South West England, actually saying to me, well, at the end of the day, we are also more concerned about what benefit those services are to people rather than actually just putting a pound value on that. I think we all recognise that there's big savings to be made by the approach that we're taking, but actually I'm being warned off putting a cash value on things. And I'm also being told, the numbers aren't as important as that qualitative stuff. So I'm quite happy that if they're quite happy, I'm going to carry on with that, outcomes-based benefit to people approach.
I guess we are where we are, and we're in a time of cost cutting, and inevitably money is going to be at the top of everybody's agenda. However, I think you're absolutely right in what's underlying your question. And the thing to remember is that the vast majority of humans respond to a story, right? Which is why I think your table tennis story is so powerful. And it's about understanding who is going to be making the decision. It's about understanding their personal prejudices. And it's about telling a story that speaks to those prejudices. Numbers will be and inevitably will be part of that story, but they shouldn't be, and they will only be effective if they're part of a much wider narrative. So it's about telling the right story to that person. And Tony Blair responds to a very different story to Gordon Brown, and your head of health will respond to a very different story to the head of transport. And understanding who they are to get the story right is absolutely critical.
Simon?
Yeah, I think it might be what are the stories to which people respond? going back to Tom Compton's European Common Cause, you know, he points out that we do all include within ourselves contradictory, different impulses. We will all respond to a variety of things. So partly down to us, how do we set social stories in a way that is different? And we do have, despite years of kind of fat-right neoliberalism, we do now have a Conservative government which has brought in indices of well-being. So there is room to operate, and I don't think it's necessarily party political. And so I suppose the question I'd be setting myself when I'm communicating the benefits of what I do is how do I frame it? There's going to have to be, for anyone working in the public sector or the third sector, there's going to have to be a financial element. But which bit am I pushing first? Which bit am I going to actually put my passion into? So if we're passionate about the bits that are about wider societal benefits, about the intrinsic values I was talking about, I think that's the most important thing.
Right, that concludes the question and answer session. I'm sure we could have done another round, but our time budget probably is a metaphor for the budgets that we're talking about today.